Right, let's get started. So, Sam asked me to come in and run a session with you folks specifically around anatomy and doing it in such a way that it's approachable but also really useful for 3D animators and seeing it from a very specific perspective of how to understand and utilize anatomy. So I said, yeah, of course, I'll absolutely do that, not a problem. This approach actually is quite tricky because by design you made a clear decision technically to follow like a certain workflow. Yeah, there's a certain way that you want to work and a certain discipline area you want to focus on, which means that there is a temptation almost to like look at just one part of anatomy, like just like at one little slice of it, which is really dangerous. And actually, we should try and be as broad as possible. But what I've done is I've kind of put together a couple of activities we can do this morning that will really help you think about not just anatomy, but what the point of knowing it is if you are an animator. Because that's the thing that throws people. A lot of people assume that when we think about understanding anatomy, we think about it like in fine art terms, like life drawing terms almost, of just knowing where the things are and what they look like, and how to draw proportioned skeletons and proportioned muscle groups and things like that, which is lovely and it's a fantastic skill to have, but it's not particularly useful really for animators because our things don't stay still. We don't. Yes, we do. We have to create characters and create creatures and whatever and whatever. But they're not static objects. So actually, the anatomy is one of two things. It's anatomy and body mechanics, and the two principles hand in hand are what we need to understand, especially as 3D animators. Body mechanics is a word that you will hear thrown around so much, especially as you advance in your understanding of character animation and creature animation. And full motion, full performance as well. The first thing you have to do before you can make something act is bring it to life. And that's what body mechanics is that believable movement. And before you can do body mechanics, you have to understand the anatomy of the thing that you're trying to bring to life. Okay, so it's a stepping stone process. So I like to think of it in sort of real world examples, and I try not to differentiate actually between acting, like live acting, and animation. They are effectively the same thing. There's quite a talented animator, a guy called Darren Butters, who's animated for loads of feature films and stuff. And I remember him saying that there are barely any actors who are animators, but all animators should be actors, and we should understand the performance principles and understand them, how we are able to move and what our limitations of movement are. And also when we apply that principle to a character, how a character moves and what that character's limitations are based on their design. So with that in mind, I've got a question for you, okay? It starts with a fence. This is a fence. You've all seen one of these before. It's, at a guess, I'm going to say this fence is probably 6 feet high, give or take, and is solid as well. It's clearly a solid wood fence. It's not like a weak, flimsy panel fence. It's clearly a very rigid construction. And then we've got these weird rocks in front of it. And my question to you is, Ace Ventura, or Jim Carrey as Ace Ventura, and James Corden as Smithy. I would like you to think very carefully right now, in a race, who gets over that fence first? Genuinely, I'm asking you, what are your opinions? You've got a choice. Jim Carrey as Ace Ventura, or James Corden as Smithy? Anyone want to pick one? Anyone set on who it's going to be? Why Jim Carrey? Oh, he's light. Yeah, okay. Yeah, he's quite kind of wiry, isn't he? There's not much to him. He's quite slight. I would counter your point by saying he's an idiot. Yeah. So his character might impact somehow the way he tackles it. Any other supporters for Ace Ventura getting over this fence first? Okay. Any other justification other than him being thin?
He's quite an energetic character.
Very true. He is a very physical character, isn't he? He's very, very, animated. Very animated individual. Okay. Sam?
I think he's taller.
Yeah, Jim Carrey's tall, isn't he? He's got to be 6 feet.
He's pretty tall.
Yeah. But then James Corden, I don't know. I've met James Corden in the flesh, but didn't really size him up. I think he's about 5'10". So he's not tiny. He's not a small guy. Would anyone going to lump for James Corden as Smithy?
I don't know who this
It's from Gavin and Stacey. He's a famous actor, performer. You should watch it. It's okay. Yeah, I'm not going to say it's good, but it's a thing. It exists. I'm torn actually between the two because yes, Ace Ventura is thin. He's energetic, animated, physically, but he is an idiot. Smithy is larger, slower, but more determined. And if any of you have seen this show, you'll know he's actually quite an aggressive character. Like he's quite driven in the way he behaves. If he wants to do something, he'll do it. And he'll do it in a very theatrical fashion because he likes getting his own way. He's very opinionated. So he's quite driven, and the thought of losing would probably propel him to get over faster. The other argument I'd put in favour of James Corden's character, despite his size, is in fact his size. He has more muscle than Ace Ventura. So it might not be down to how much you weigh, but how much muscle you've got to move that weight, yeah, and how much strength you've got to move that weight. So I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Maybe one day, somehow, this will happen, and we'll get to see it play out. But this is the sort of thing we need to think about. I know it seems odd, but you've all just spent a minute or two thinking about how two people will overcome an obstruction, and not being able to play it out in your head, not being able to play it out physically, not being able to test it or sketch it or act it. You've just got to think, based on the observations you can make and the knowledge you have, what the outcome is. And that's basically what anatomy and body mechanics is. Okay, you have to, before you can start animating, particularly in Maya, because it's so tempting in 3D animation, because it's quite fast, to start throwing shapes together and start making basic movements and doing blocking passes of movements and stuff. It's really tempting to do that. But if you're doing it without thinking about it, you're probably going to do it wrong, and then it will probably take you longer in the long term, because you didn't apply the thought process beforehand. So that's what we're going to do today, is really start looking at an object, looking at a character or a construct, and thinking to ourselves, okay, how is this character made? You know, what is their musculoskeletal anatomy, their structure? But then what are the implications of that? What does that mean for them? What are their limitations? And what are their abilities that maybe are different to the person stood next to them? So let's move on. So just this term body mechanics, just to settle what we mean by this, because it is a term you'll hear a lot as you get more and more, particularly if you become a character animator. You know, body mechanics is a big thing. So body mechanics is the relationship between that performance and design. So the way something is designed defines how it is able to perform and how it is able to come to life. There are rules around that relationship, which we can go into in a little bit more detail, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. I want to get you doing stuff and actually start creating content in this session. Then it's the idea of that calculation, so actually understanding almost the science of how something moves based on its design. So a good example of this, have you all seen at least one Jurassic Park movie? Yeah? Those dinosaurs work, not just because they kind of look cool, but because their mechanics are extremely believable. Like that. So, if you think about a rig in Maya or a rig in Cinema 4D, they're weightless. They're absolutely weightless. You can spin them around and flick them all over the place, and there's no drag on them for the most part, unless you start playing with physics. And yet, when they're animated, they have a believable weight. You know, I think about the first Jurassic Park movie, the scene with the T-Rex when it gets out of the enclosure and the two cars, and the way that dinosaur moves. Yes, the close-up stuff was a robot, but the actual full body shots were animated, and that creature feels like it weighs 30 tons. It moves in the shot in a way that feels heavy. Okay, when you think about films like Pacific Rim as a good example, Godzilla, King Kong, anything with just a massive creature in it. Pacific Rim did a particularly good job with their robots. Those robots felt like they weighed thousands of tons. They moved in a way that was believable. It wasn't just the splashing of the water and the stuff. When they hit when they hit the monster, you could feel the impact of that. It's like, wow, this is something that weighs 1,000 tons hitting something else that weighs 1,000 tons. And if I was in the middle, I would just be juice. The power of those movements. And that's body mechanics. It's really understanding the maths almost of the relationship between something's size and its design and the way it's able to move. And then the final one is that remember, we don't make this stuff for ourselves. We make it for other people, don't we? All this artwork and whether it's drawn or stop motion or 3D, I'm hoping none of you are here to make things just to please yourself. Yeah, you want to make things for other people, for the world to see potentially. And part of that means we have to suspend their disbelief. We have to have our audience believe what they're seeing. And mechanics is a big part of that. Like I said, a dinosaur that feels like it weighs a certain weight. Or even just suspending their disbelief in that they don't think about the fact that they're watching animation. You know, that they can completely look past it. Sometimes it goes very, very wrong, actually, and we completely fail to suspend disbelief. The best example I can think about off the top of my head of the complete failure to suspend disbelief for an audience, they're a slightly obscure film. The second Blade movie, Blade 2, directed by, it was Guillermo del Toro, who's a great director. Like, I love all the stuff. But there was a sequence in that they animated Blade and two vampires fighting, and it just looks like Mortal Kombat. It's just completely flat characters sort of flailing limbs around and doing weird somersaults, and all the weight was off. And it just, for all of 30 seconds of that 2-hour movie, everyone's disbelief kind of just came to the fore, and we're like, this is nonsense. And then they tried to put bright lights over it to make it look like silhouettes, like that was going to help. It didn't. It was awful. Okay, so we all know what this is. I hope we've all got one for the most part. And when we think about anatomy, we've got to start thinking about how, not just what this is, we know what a skeleton is. Yeah, you know what your bones are. But you have to start thinking about how they move and how they work with one another and what the relationships between them are. And understanding what the limitations of them are as well. So, for example, you have areas of rigidity in your body. Let's go to this one. Oh, actually, no, let's stay here for a moment. You have areas of rigidity. So we have the three kind of most rigid parts of our body, actually, are this one, obviously, your skull, your cranium, completely rigid because your brain lives in it, and that's important, and it has to be protected. The second area of rigidity is here, your pelvis. The reason that is incredibly rigid, this collection of bones, just here, I think it's 4 bones or 6 bones, just here, is incredibly rigid because that's your center of gravity. We'll talk about this in a little while, actually, the idea that the human center of gravity is at the waist. That's where we balance, that's where we kind of, everything we do, every movement that we have actually starts from the waist and then extends to the extremities. And then the third area, which people maybe don't think about too much, is your rib cage. So your rib cage is made up of tons of bones, all interlocking with one another, all centrally kind of fused between your vertebrae of the spine, so at the back here, the spinal vertebrae, the top vertebrae, and this bone at the front, the sternum, which again, that's one of the densest bones in your body, actually, your sternum, which is why it's so easy to break. It's a massive evolutionary flaw. But again, that's solid because it protects the thing that matters, your heart. Yeah, it's a cage over your heart. But your rib cage, even though your rib cage is able to move, it can swell, it can contract and expand. Your diaphragm allows you to do that, otherwise you wouldn't be able to breathe. It's actually quite rigid in that it's full flexion, so the amount of movement it has isn't much. Yeah, it can kind of do this. That's about it. Can't bend side to side too well. It can curl forward, but actually it can't very well. So maybe people don't realise this, when you bend over, like when you roll forward, your rib cage doesn't bend. You've got a big old gap here in the front of your sternum, and that's designed so that your spine doesn't crush your liver when you bend forward. Yeah, so you get a bit of movement. Stuff can kind of move. Basically, things move out of the rib cage or move into the rib cage based on how you move. But the actual shape of it is quite rigid. And then so those are our rigid areas. Then we've got our soft areas. So soft areas are areas of limited limited rigidity or limited bone structure. So our softest area is this one right here. We've got a big old gap between our hips and our waists. So down here, right up to our rib cage, and that's where all kind of the expendable stuff is stored. So I'm not saying you won't die if your kidney falls out, you'll die, but you can live for longer. These is very, very durable, and it's also quite well protected. You've got, as well as having no bones here, this is also an area with one of the highest densities of muscle mass, or the most complex densities of muscle mass. Okay, you have a lot of muscle, both on the sides, on the back, and of course your abdominal muscles on the front that hold all of that stuff in, yeah, that keep it all contained. Regardless of your size, you all have that container, but it's really flexible because it's muscle and it can move in really dynamic ways. So you've got the soft areas here, and then you've got other soft areas that maybe people don't think about too often. Is your thighs, so around your femur, so your quadriceps and your hamstrings, extremely dense muscle. But actually, when you think about how much space your thigh occupies against the size of the bone, it's an area of quite a lot of flexibility in terms of shape. Like your legs can take lots of different shapes, and they can, like, you can squeeze your legs down to quite thin shape. You can manipulate them. They flatten as well. When you sit down, your legs take a different shape. Yes, it's like there's quite a bit of flexibility there compared to like your head, which has nothing. Like it's always the same shape, whichever way you bend it or wherever you put it, it's the same. So yeah, we've got rigid areas, and we've got the kind of more flexible areas and the more malleable areas. We'll get into like flexion and rotation and stuff in a second. But what I wanted you to think about is if we've all got this, yeah, we've got this. We're all humans. We've all got this skeleton. So he's got this. So's he, and so's she. So how does that work? We've got 3 characters here that all have to have a skeleton. They're all human. They all have a skeleton. But that doesn't fit into that. There's no easy calculation here. Something has to change. Some additional subtraction or manipulation has to happen for that skeletal construct that we know exists. It has to exist because that's how we move them, and these people live. But it has to exist inside these shapes. So what we see in character design and in body mechanics for 3D animation is a manipulation of that skeleton. Is that though we all have a skeleton, the proportions within it have to be adjusted and they have to be manipulated and changed in some way in order for them to make sense. And we also have to think about, when we think about their anatomy, then we start thinking about the way they move. So the most normal person of these 3 is Fred in the middle. He's got the closest to a regular skeleton. He's still off. I mean, look at the shape of his head. Yeah, he's not got a traditionally shaped skull. But in terms of the proportions of his body, they're fairly regularly shaped. And we're going to do some draw-overs on this as an exercise in a little while to kind of get our heads in the right place with it. But then when you think about, if we then to draw a comparison between him and Bosch-Yama, there's a big difference here in anatomy. I mean, let's just take a couple of examples. You look at the width of his shoulders. Okay, so from the tip of the collarbone here on either side, here to here. Where are we? Let's go back. There to there. I reckon Bosch-Yama is 4.5 times the width of Fred. Easily. Possibly more. Okay, so in terms of his rigid areas, there's a difference here. And now think about the relationship between his skull. So look how close the shoulders are to the sides of his head and the distance between them. Okay, if he extended his arm straight up, he could probably touch the side of his head without tipping his head. I can't do it, but he probably can. This character probably can. I'm not entirely sure that Bosch-Yama could even touch his ears with his fingers. Okay, extended upwards because of the width of his shoulders. His anatomy is so different that his movements are completely different as well. So it's entirely possible that he can't get this thumb on that ear. I don't know. Someone should maybe email the team over there and say, can you just do this, settle this argument for us? Can Bosch-Yama touch his ears? So that's one thing. So we know that their movements are different. But then think about their mass as well. So think about how much space Fred occupies. Just think about silhouette, flat shape, how much space this character occupies. Again, he occupies about 1/5 of the space of Bosch-Yama. I reckon if you rolled him into a ball, you could fit him comfortably inside Bosch-Yama's stomach. Now, in terms of weight, that means that he must weigh 5 times what Fred weighs, potentially. Possibly more. Actually, and we'll talk about why it's possibly more when we do the draw-over exercises in a moment, or in a little while. So yeah, he's going to be heavier. Now, the average person can quite comfortably lift 10% of their own body weight, and most people can lift 5%. Some people can lift half quite comfortably as well. And then anything beyond that requires a level of real athleticism to lift beyond half your own body weight. So if that's true, I think it's possible that Fred, as he's quite thin with lack of muscle, if you asked Fred to pick up a 12-pound or a 15-pound bowling ball, he would be able to bend over and pick it up. If you asked Bosiyama to pick up Fred, he'd probably do it exactly the same way. Okay? If you think about going over here to Edna, Edna's anatomy, apart from her ridiculously large head, her anatomy is not that disproportionate to Fred's. Like they're fairly close. She's wider in the hips, so she's quite close to Bosiyama in terms of neck density to hip. She's got the triangle, just like he's got the triangle. But yeah, it's just her head that's oversized. She probably weighs 2/3 of what Fred weighs, even with her giant head. Okay, she's definitely lighter. She doesn't have as much muscle, so she won't have the same weight density. She'll definitely be lighter. Theoretically, that means that Bosiyama should be able to pick Edna up with one hand, just like that, like a cricket ball. Just kind of lift her straight off the ground. It's also possible that Edna could probably push Fred over. Most people can move more than their own body weight. Like if you ask them to, if you like, so I weigh approximately 15 stone. If you put a 30-stone concrete block in front of me, I could probably roll it just slightly. Could just get it to move. So Edna could probably just get Fred to move. Asking Edna to move Bosiyama would be like asking me to move this building. You know, just push it and it might move. It's not going to happen. Yeah, there's too much difference. The anatomy and the design means that the mechanics and the movement are limited. Yeah, there's a range of what a character can do and what they can't do. Right, moving on. So when we design it, so we know that characters are designed differently. Yeah, so the rigid things, core organ casings, this one, pelvis. Limb extensions, this is an interesting one. So there is a rigidity in our extension of our limbs. So we can bend at the elbow, at the shoulder, at the ankle, at the knee, but we can't bend midway through the femur. Yeah, we can't bend midway through the thigh. We can't bend midway through the humerus or anything like that. So there's rigidity in the extension of our limbs, these points. We've got to remember that. And our centre of balance, so that pelvis is really important. That's where we balance. And I'm going to show you an example of a centre of balance that's not the pelvis and how that changes the way a character moves and the way the character is designed. Then we've got the flexible areas, so areas of muscle density around the midriff. And then we've got areas of extreme flexion and extreme rotation, and they are not the same. Extreme flexion means something can bend a very long way. So our areas of extreme flexion are our elbows and our knees. That's where we can do a lot of flexion. We can go from one angle to another. Yeah. So what's that? 140 degrees, I think. That entire flexion, about 140 maybe. Some people more. They've got lower muscle density. They'll have greater flexion. And then extreme rotation is where we have the ability to rotate our limbs. So our areas of extreme rotation we only have 4 as well, are our shoulders and our hips. Okay, 2 shoulders, 2 hips. Our wrists and our feet are not areas of extreme rotation. Like you can rotate your wrist, yeah? And you can get a fair way. So you can get about, like looking at that dead straight, that's 45, that's 45. So that's a 90 degree flex that way, and I can do that way is a bit further, so it's about 100 degrees. Compare that to being able to roll your shoulder all the way around, yeah, and move it at all angles. It's a completely different set of movements. It's the same for your hips. Like there are people who can rotate their hips all the way around, yeah, they can go beyond a 180 flexion, you know, they can go like beyond the splits. But compare that to your ankle. Like you can't rotate your foot backwards, can you? You can go up and down, and you've got a slight tilt on your foot side to side, but that's it. That's where the movement ends. So they're not areas of extreme rotation. So they have movement, but they're not flexible. Okay, they're more for like posing and finishing. All right, some examples. So this is some artwork by Bill Schwab. So Bill Schwab is a very, very talented character designer, but one of the things he specializes in is designing for 3D animation. So he's worked on a lot of different projects, 2D as well, but it's where in 3D animation that he's kind of had his most success. And that's because when he designs characters, he doesn't just design the way they look, but he's from the very beginning, he thinks about, okay, how does this character move? What are its limitations of movement based on its anatomy? So with these rhinos, this is from Zootopia, Zootropolis, whatever you want to call it. These are great examples of that consideration for anatomy. So obviously it's a rhino. What I think the first intelligent piece of design here is in almost none of these, this one's the only kind of different one, but all the others, the spine is curved. Can you see the curvature that's happening on the spine there? And even when the character's just walking here, like there is a curvature on that spine. It's quite distinct. And that you can see it even over, you can see the curve even when it's masked and hidden by loads of body fat and muscle. And the reason that curve is there is because this rhino has got a massive abdomen. Okay, so its abdominal muscles and its abdominal fat, that body fat, is so big that it's literally pulling the body forwards. And the only way to counterbalance that is to bend the spine back. Yeah, so the structural anatomy is changing here because of the way the character's going to have to react to that anatomy. So this character can't stand up straight. They'll always be leaning back or slightly bent because of the weight on the front of them. Other things are his shoulders are always really low. I know he's got like a big rhino neck, but if you look here, the shoulders always feel kind of dropped. And that's because of all of this muscle and muscle mass and fat here around the arms. They weigh a lot, so they hang low. Yeah, he's not up and springy with high shoulders because he can't. They're too heavy. So you're going to hang down and create really interesting shapes to animate. Okay, so these are all really good things. I love this one, that he can't quite touch the floor, even though he's got tiny little legs, really short little legs. You think he should be able to just touch the floor. But that mass on the front, this mass here, prevents him from doing it because it folds up. Yeah, it can't disappear, it just has to redistribute around the body. It's got nowhere to go. So he's kind of limited on that movement. So that's Bill Schwab doing a very large character. And then another quick example is Torsten Schrank, who again designs for animation. This character is the exact opposite. So here we've got a character that lacks muscular definition and lacks body fat. So they're quite kind of thin. And what are the implications of that? Well, first off, absence, when you are smaller in size as a character, when your anatomy is smaller, you are also weaker. Okay? Ask any bodybuilder or professional weightlifter, like competition weightlifters, and they will tell you that weight moves weight. You've got to be bigger to move bigger objects. The smaller you are, the less you can move. And that applies all the way down to where we've got quite kind of elongated or thin characters like this. It's not just fat that they're missing, they're also missing muscle density. So their movements will be quite limited. And in this character, the limitation is that the area where he should have the most flexion, which is the abdomen, he should have the most kind of movement there, he's actually got very little. He's always very upright. Even when he's crouched down, he's always kind of a bit straight in the middle. Yeah? He doesn't bend over. He always just has this kind of very sort of straight area towards the middle. Here and here. Look, even when he's leaning forward, he doesn't lean. He leans from the hip and not through the stomach. Here as well, like he just feels awkward and uncomfortable. And that's because this character doesn't have the ability to push himself into dynamic shapes. The opposite of this is just go and look at any concept art for any of the Spider-Man films or computer games, or even just the comic books, and look at the positions of Spider-Man. Spider-Man moves into the most intensely dramatic abdominal positions. His body folds over itself and curves really tight, and he does that because Spider-Man's really strong. He has the muscular density and the muscular strength to contort his body and to contort his torso into lots of different shapes. So we've got to think about that as well. Just like very large characters are limited in their movement of their extremities and how they bend, so are very small characters. Their anatomy has a direct imprint on the way that they are able to move. Here's just a kind of things to consider when we think about implications of muscle and what it does. So first off, skeletal-muscular ratios define movement and athleticism. So always think about what you're designing. So when you sketch a character out and you think this looks cool, the next thing you need to think is, what can't she do or what can't he do? What are the limits? Based on what I've just designed, what are the implications for the way this character can move and what's the peak of their ability? And then finally, that centre of gravity. Always remember what you're doing with the centre of gravity. And we're going to, part of the draw overs, we're going to look at this. So I said I'd show you a character that the centre of gravity was off. Here's my choice. These are sketches by, I think these are Glenn Keane's actually. They're Glenn Keane or Jin Kim. I think they're Glenn Keane. So these are Glenn Keane's sketches of from Tarzan. And Tarzan was an interesting character because his centre of gravity was the same as a gorilla's. So a gorilla's centre of gravity is across their shoulder. That's where all their balance comes from. So when they want to move, they move like the shoulders start the movement and everything else follows after. When they want to climb and they go to move up to climb up a tree, they won't start by, when we would do that, if you said to someone, can you climb up that? The first thing people would do is they'd stand up straight and then they'd lean back from the hip and kind of go, all right, what am I doing? They'd lean from here and look up and go, okay, what have I got to do? A gorilla will actually move shoulder first. So they'll lean in, they'll arch their back, they'll completely ignore what their hind legs are doing and arch their back and lean their shoulders upwards to move. And that's what they did with Tarzan. They worked out, well, this is a human character who's been raised by gorillas, so we've got to change his centre of gravity. And he doesn't move from the hip anymore, he moves from the shoulders just like they do. And you can see it in the way he's animated. I've got a really quick clip. I don't want to get too far off this, so I want you lot drawing it as quickly as possible. But I have got a clip here. Where I can show you this. Sorry, it's probably going to be quite low quality on this screen. So these are just some sketches. Again, concept sketches. But look at the way everything's positioned from the shoulder upwards. Like his legs just sort of follow behind. You don't have to do this, so this is excessive. You don't have to draw all the muscles in that level of definition when you design a character. It helps. But here, this is it. Look at the way he moves. Everything starts from the shoulders. When he leans forward from the shoulders, and his legs barely move. They just sort of linger behind. Everything's here. When he falls, unlike any human ever, he falls shoulder first. If you jump off of something, which way down do you like to fall? Feet first, right? Because that's how you don't die, right? You hope that the strength of your legs and density and strength of your ankles will mean that you land relatively safely. Yeah, we almost act like a spring, don't we? As we hit the floor, we bend our whole body and we kind of roll, yeah, and hope that we're okay. Watch the way he falls. He goes down head first, with his hips just kind of dangling behind him. Yeah, straight down. It's a completely different centre of gravity. Look at there's that bend as well. See how he looks upwards with his shoulders first, and his legs just don't really do anything. So it's a character whose centre of gravity is completely changed. And you know what? It totally works. It makes you believe that Tarzan is not just a guy who lives in the jungle, but someone who was raised by a different species. Yeah, and his movement, he's taken on the movements and the kind of opinions and mannerisms, should we say, of that species. So yeah, sorry, slight distraction there, but it kind of hammers the point home a little bit. I'm not going to get too much into this. We can go back to this at the end, actually, which is some guidelines for the mechanics. When we start thinking about moving something, we can look at that. But what I want to do is get us into the task. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start with the three that we've already looked at. Okay, so the two characters from Big Hero 6 and then, what's her face, Edna. We're going to start with those and we're going to do an analysis of their shape and their silhouette. Then we're going to look at their construction and start to understand, okay, what does the actual skeletal structure look like for those characters? And then we'll look at, all right, well, what does that do for the muscles? How do those muscles work for those characters? So we're going to do a breakdown and understand their construction. And then we're going to start thinking about action. And we're going to start designing some anatomy and thinking about the movement of that anatomy using the same process the other way around. So you will need to open... I put them on Moodle for you, as I said. If I just go up to wherever I am on Moodle. Where are we? So on Moodle, under 3D computer animation, you've got two files. Anatomy 101, the draw over file, and the character design template. So if you could go to open up Photoshop, and I'll just talk you through what these two files are. So did I open my character? I did. Good. So just for clarity, so these two characters, so the two from Big Hero 6 were both designed by an artist called Jin Kim, who I'll show you some examples of his work. And then Edna Mode was partly designed, or refined at least, by Bill Schwab and Tony Fusilli. You're gonna have to Google that. I'm pretty sure it's Tony Fusilli that did the very, very early artwork for back the first Incredibles movie. Okay, so first things first. Have you all got this? Is it starting to open up? They shouldn't take too long to download, don't they? I won't open what, Moodle or the file? Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. So what do you have access to? Yeah, I'll move it. I'll copy it over to there. That's fine. Don't worry. Have no fear. Together we will overcome the limitations of the registry team. So yeah, just give me 2 seconds, folks. I'm just going to add these files onto the other pathway. So you say you're on Animation Arts, yeah?
Well, I'm moving
But as far as the registry team are concerned, you still exist on Animation Arts. Okay, I just want to know where to put it. I don't want to put anything in the wrong place. So we're just going to do this quick upload. We'll call this one, I can't spell. Okay. It should, as soon as you click the file, it should auto-download. Has anyone else had a problem downloading the files? No? Okay, good. So the first one's just been added onto Animation Arts. And then... Okay, there you go. Right, so in Photoshop, we're going to do a couple of things. So first off, we're going to start by just going through what these two files are. The first one is just a very, very generic. So the Anatomy 101 one, which is this one, is just a very, very generic large format document, or large document format, which is a .psb file. I don't know, do any of you use PSB files at the moment? Okay. Yeah, just do that. Just use PSBs. Let's put anything that's complex design, or you're doing multiple layers, or any kind of painting, or anything like that. Yeah, PSB is just a good way to go. And then, yeah, same as the digital arts class. Actually, we've got these. We've got grayed out, so 50% black background on a separate. 50% light background on the other layer, and then this one is the character design template. So this one is. I think is it 8,000 across? So it's 8,000 across by 2,000 high. So it's a very, very large file, but it's designed to allow us to sketch characters side by side, to do a full lineup, left to right, of different design ideas and explore them and be able to see them all at once. One of the hard things with character design is we sometimes get so caught up with designing something that we forget the context in which we're designing it. And then when you put it against another character, you're like, yeah, they don't look like they're in the same universe. I've got two characters here that feel like they were drawn for different things and they don't work together. So doing lineup space like this, where you're just doing like one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, it's a great way to keep them all in check. And because it's 2,000 high, you can do them in a fair amount of detail. You can really kind of go into them. We're not going to do this one yet, though. Let's go to this. So with I've just created a new layer. Let's put my caps lock on actually, so you can see my cursor a bit better. So I've created a new layer, and then we've got this layer, which is the three characters that we just talked about, and I've put a layer in over the top. On that layer, I'm just going to go to a slight near white, slightly off white brush. So just a fairly basic brush. And what we're going to do is just have a quick chat about how much skeleton you need to skeleton. okay? Because let's be real here. You are all doing this so that you can be better at 3D animation. You're not doing this to be fine artists. Yeah, this is not a life drawing class. This is about animating and bringing stuff to life. So we can where we can sort of limit ourselves with the amount of content or the amount of information that we put into our work. So when we're thinking about skeleton, my recommendation is you focus on what we call a skeletal frame drawing, which is a simplified version of the skeleton where we isolate the rigid and flexible areas. So a skeletal frame drawing normally consists of a spine, something that vaguely represents the rib cage like this. The pelvis is the next rigid element. The head. Try where you can to keep your proportions fairly sound. So I've got my legs, feet, however you want to do them. You know, everybody's different, whatever. So feet, and then so the things that are important to remember though, obviously your head and your rib cage should never touch or even be anywhere near one another. But also when we put the shoulders in, the shoulders don't sit here. Your shoulders do not line up with your head. Ever, all right? So they actually sit outwards. So the shoulders float. They float out here. And you've got upper arm, lower arm, and then your hand of whatever form that takes. So the idea of this kind of sketching is it's super simplified. It's just like, okay, I know what's rigid, yeah? So that bit's rigid, that bit's rigid, that bit's rigid. I know where my flexation points are because I've left kind of gaps for them. So they're here and here. And here and here. And I also kind of know my rotation points are because they're floating. So one here, and here, and here and here. And then we've got that big old bit in the middle, which we can do whatever we like with. So it's not about, when we talk about anatomy, it's not about detail. It's really not. It's just understanding what counts. You know, what's the hard bits, what's the soft bits. So that kind of drawing is really good. And where you can, try and think about movement. So just because I've drawn that does not mean that you can line that up over the top of this guy, because you absolutely can't. All right, there's twisting and there's movement going on here, and I'm going to sketch that in a second. So what we're now going to do is go to this middle layer that's got the characters on, and in the opacity of the layer, just bring it down, just lower it down to sort of kind of 50%, 45% is probably okay, kind of around that area. Then go back up to a top layer. That just helps that near white kind of pop a little bit more. It helps us see it a little bit clearer. And then what I want you to do, I want you to look at this drawing and really look and try and work out what the actual position of the anatomy is. Like where are those rigid parts? Where are those soft parts? Now this is important because within a production pipeline, so within a feature film or a TV show or whatever it might be, or a game or whatever, there is a point when the rigging team and the design team, the only thing they have to work from is a flat drawing. Yeah, the art department, the drawn art department, or the visual development department will send across a bunch of sketches and paintings and be like, yeah, they look like this, and they're all flat. They're all flat objects. So there is always going to be this point where you have to transition from thinking about something just as a lovely drawing into a construct. How is it made? How is it structured? And they'll always do stuff like this where they pose them. Because that's how character artists are trained. They're trained to pose characters and give them personality and dynamicism that no one ever does. And a little piece of me dies actually when I see students do this, where they do those really kind of rigid artworks. If you do that for a model, like for a 3D model, fine, totally get it. I understand why you've got to do a T pose to work out the texture, the surfacing, the topography, and all of that. Totally understand. But it's a flat drawing. To draw it, make it interesting. Don't do the weird T-pose. It makes no sense. So you'll get sketches like this. So let's just go into this. Let's get that opacity down. Let's get down to 47. That'll do. And then in here, so I'm going to start with Fred. So first off, Fred's obviously his head's at an angle. So you just mark that off and not worry about it too much. We know it's at an angle. But then his hips, he's got some interesting action here in his hips because they're turned slightly. And that implies that there's a bit of bending going on. So, and that his ribs are turned the other way as well. So his spinal shape is not a straight line. kind of more like that. Okay. Now, what does that do for his rib cage? Well, it means that his rib cage is not symmetrical in the way it's drawn. It's going to look more like that. And that's because if we draw, so from the front it looks like that, but from the side, the rib cage looks like that. Yeah, it doesn't. So your rib cage, your spine doesn't sit in the middle of your rib cage. Yeah, it sits at the back. So this shape here is slightly offset. So his sternum is kind of more over here. It's not dead center. So you can see it's not the same shape there. And then his hips are turned again. So actually his hips are quite central. So his hips are kind of around there. Shoulder there, shoulder there. So just work through this and mark these in. Look at in the sketch where his knees are. So his knee is, the first one ends about there. That's wrong. It's actually, there's a small curve on it. The actual femur, it starts further out. So it's more up here. And it ends around there. This one's here. There you go. So just kind of work, so do head, spine, rigid areas, and then you start working on the extremities. So just go and sketch those in, please, and where you think they are. So there's signifiers, there's creases and sorts of things that will kind of help you understand roughly where things are placed. You can connect that neck up. Doesn't matter too much. The reason I generally don't connect necks when I think about anatomy is because, and have you all, Sam, have they played with any 3D character rigs yet?
Just a little bit.
Which ones did you use?
We used the Unreal Mannequin.
Okay, cool.
So he's pretty basic, and
Yeah.
we just last week installed those long winter rigs.
Right, okay. So yeah, the long winter mechanics rigs, I think some of them have got it, where in the neck, you've actually got 2 points of rotation, so extreme and fairly, you've got one that's limited rotation and one that's extreme rotation, and they're at the base of the top of the neck. So the base of the neck here, you've got a limited rotation. So you have got kind of movement up and down, and then at the top of the neck, you've got obviously extreme rotation because that's how you actually move your head. So when I think about skeletal frame drawing, I generally just don't draw a neck in because that line can be incredibly complex and it can be moving in all sorts of different ways. And normally the position of the head will tell you what the neck will look like anyway. So I tend not to worry too much about it. I tend to just leave them floating. Okay, so that's that character. I'm going to go over to Boss Yama now. So, and also, just for reference, if you just wipe it out, can you see how the proportions of this skeleton are not the same as the proportions of that skeleton? Yeah, you think about the length of the legs against the length of the spine. This is close to human proportion. This is not. Those legs are far too short for a normal human, like a real life human, and that abdominal cavity is far too long. So he's not, he is a characterization. He is not a realistic character. Right, Boss Yama. Okay, so Boss Yama straight off is going to have a slight curvature on his spine. And the reason I know he's got a curvature on his spine is because if he was standing dead straight, his belly button would be there. But it's not there, it's over here. So we know he's turned slightly. And if we just go back here, the spine doesn't, from the side, does not do that, okay? It's more like that. Actually, it's even more curved. It's more like that. Okay, so the spine has a curvature to it. Again, that's how we can jump off things and land on our feet and not die. Because when we land, our back, our spinal cord has that loads of flex in it, because it's a series of bones. And the way when we hit the ground, our spine, if it was in a dead straight line, would just compress and we'd die. So having it in a shape that's like an S shape, when we hit that S shape bends. Yeah, think about it like squishing the letter S down. Yeah, it actually has a bit of bend and a bit of spring to it, which is why it's that shape. Yeah, some animals don't have that. Cats, I don't know, someone told me this once, that cats land on their feet because they can't land on their bum. Like if a cat lands on its bum, it could really hurt itself because its spine is relatively straight in comparison to most other animals. So they always aim for the feet, where they can bend in and absorb the shock of landing. Anyway, should we go back to Boss Yama? Right, so the spine is going to kind of be more like this. Yes, it's slightly offset. Remember, I'm thinking about, when I look at that drawing, I'm not looking at the lines on the page. I'm looking at it as a three-dimensional shape. If he's rotated slightly, I'm thinking about where is his actual spine? Well, it's going to be across the back there. Okay, and then where's his rib cage? Well, we know the apex of his rib cage is here. Yeah, because it's below, because there's the line for his sternum. So it's something sort of more like that. So this is the sternum. So you'd have the ribs kind of there and there. And we're looking under it now. We're kind of like at the back of it. So that's the spinal line. Make it a bit thicker so it really stands out. It kind of goes up to about there. Actually, let's clean these lines up a bit. Yeah, so we're kind of looking at around there. I think that might be a slight stretch, but it's fairly close. I think it's probably around it. And then we've got the hips. This is interesting. So that pelvis, that solid area, we think about the average skeleton, and I'll just get back on that PowerPoint. I love a good PowerPoint, not that one. Where is it? That one. This one. You see how there's, without our sort of pelvis to our rib cage, we've got a fairly close relationship. It varies person to person, but yeah, our pelvis is sort of around the same width as the widest point of our rib cage. Some people will be slightly wider. Some people will be slightly narrower. I think men, just because of the position of our pelvic bones, like the formation of them, they tend to be narrower, just because they're rotated slightly. But yeah, they're fairly close. There's not much in it. Now, by comparison, go back to Boss Yama, who's got his legs. So he's got his legs facing more or less straight at us. Okay, his legs are fairly symmetrical towards us, but his upper body's twisted. Yeah, he's not standing in a dead straight line. But look at the width. When we think about that space, that is so much wider than his rib cage, significantly wider. Yeah, and that's an exaggeration. That allows for an exaggeration of movement. You remember what I said about weight? Weight moves weight. Yeah, he needs to look imposing. He needs to look strong, and in order to make him feel strong and empowering, he's got a very wide center of gravity. Yeah, it implies he's very stable on his feet. Yeah, very, very strong. So that's that, and then we've got some other stuff. We've got some kind of interesting things happening here. So let's go. We'll do the legs first, actually. So his hip bones are quite far out. Which creates a really interesting problem for him, which probably hurts quite a lot and might explain why he's wearing knee pads. Your body is never supposed to be as big as Boss Yama's. Like, think about like human anatomy. Like, we're biologically not supposed to be that large. And though we have loads of mechanisms that allow us to grow to that size and cope with it, there are some things we still haven't figured out, our body hasn't figured out. And our legs is a good example. So his legs are only able to support so much weight. And one of the things that's quite common with people who have a very large muscle mass in particular is hyperextension of the knees. You can all do this probably. You know, you can like almost bend your knees backwards. You straighten them so far that they kind of bend the other way. Yeah, that happens when you can do, that happens quite commonly when you carry a large mass, like a heavy muscle mass. Or even worse, this happens all the time with bodybuilders, is a sideways extension. So I'm not going to go too much into the science of it, but your anterior cruciate ligament, which is a little ligament on your knee here, starts to weaken, and your knees basically bow inwards. Yeah, you start to get a side bowing. It is quite common for people who are really big or just really muscly, who weigh a lot, carry a lot of mass. So he's got a little bit of that going on. You can see it more in this leg because his foot's more forward. This one not so much because his foot's to the side, so he's just got that more traditional hyperextension. But these are things that don't matter, like where are his actual bones? Shoulders, it would be easy to assume that his shoulder is there, and the other one's over here, but it's not, okay? It's not quite that extreme. Let's go back. His shoulder is actually kind of around here when it draws. Go back to select. So my machine's going a little bit funny. Thank you. Right. So his shoulders, yeah, he's got one's around here and one's around here. Now, how do we know that? The giveaway is this crease. Okay. If his shoulder muscle, like shoulder joint, was over here, everything would rotate from this point. Yeah, so everything would actually like rotate round and upwards from this point, which would mean that the crease of his armpit would be all the way over here, but it's not. Okay, the crease is here, and it is quite literally pointing to where his shoulder joint is. Okay, so if we were to have, think about us being the 3D rigger on this, you've got to turn this from a drawing to a functional rig. Yeah, we know straight away, yeah, that it's there and the crease leads us towards it, and then the other one's just over this side. And then we can draw the arms in. So what are the other clues have we got to it being there? Well, the position of the arms as well. So the forearm kind of ends about, upper arm ends here, forearm ends here, then obviously we've got hand, and then this one ends around there, and then there, and we've got hand, okay. And then finally, his head, which I'm just going to focus on the hard part. Yes, that's part of his head, but let's be honest, that's fat. Yeah, it's not a rigid component. So there's the two, and oh, sorry, I didn't put his feet in. Let's just quickly put those feet in, just to give us a bit of grounding. In terms of skeletal anatomy, they are very, very different shapes. They are dramatically different shapes. And that means that there is limitation. And that's so now we know kind of how they're proportioned. Now we can actually think about, so that's the skeletal anatomy, what's the muscular anatomy? Because it's the muscles that will start to help us to understand like the true limitation of what they can do, like how they can move. Because that's our third task, is action. We don't have to pose these. And that's a big ask. So, should we go and let's do Edna? In fact, I'm not going to talk through Edna. You do Edna. I've talked through these two. I want you to apply the same principles and processes to Edna over here, please. And I will do the same quietly on screen. Okay, how are we all getting on with that? I don't want to drag it out for too long. Just give you a couple of minutes to start kind of working through it. And once you done it, you can create a new layer just here. So I've got layer 3 is my skeleton, so layer 4, sorry, is my skeleton layer. I've created layer 5. I might just take just a moment just to label these. Yeah, please name your layers. Call that one ref. Okay, all right. Let's keep moving. So next thing we need to do, I've created this new layer. I've got reference layer, I've got my skeletal layer, and now I've got my muscle layer, which I've just called ML down the bottom here. And then what I'm going to do with this, I've changed my brush color just to red. And now I want to think about, okay, well, we know that these are effectively a representation of the rigid parts, or where there are no rigid parts, so where they exist and where they don't exist. But then with muscle is not the same as size. Like the muscle doesn't fill out all the space of a character. It fills out some of the space. But it's actually the muscle the reason we draw the muscle and think about the muscle is because that's where we understand the movement and what a character can do. Okay, so let's start with Fred actually, because Fred's really basic. He's really, really simple in terms of his muscular anatomy. What I might do as well, I'm just going to go down to my reference area. I'm just going to tone it down again, take it down to like 25%, just so it's really clear what we're sketching. And I might take my skeleton down as well. I'm just going to take that down to like 50%, and that should stand out much better. With Fred, he is a very, very slender character. He has minimal muscle structure, actually. There's only a couple of key areas I think are worth considering, all right? The first one is here. I want to say the trapezoid muscles. I can't remember what they're called. These shoulder muscles are worthy of merit, definitely. And then we've got this area here. So it's because he's got quite a long, extended shape. There are a couple of muscles here that are worth kind of noting that he clearly would have. Okay, so he's definitely going to have abdominal muscles, or some form of abdominal muscle. And down here as well, it's going to have muscles. So why am I making a note of this? Well, because he's got such a long space. So I'll just put some kind of colour these in so you can see what I mean by these muscle groups. I'm just noting now, I'm just thinking like, where is there clear muscle definition? And here as well, we have quite an extensive muscle group. So the reason I'm making a note of these ones is because he has such a large space between his ribcage and his pelvis, and he doesn't weigh much, it means he's going to have extreme flexibility in that area. Yeah, he should be able to bend and flex in the middle really, really easily. But then that means there has to be muscles there. There has to be kind of clearly defined muscle groups that are really important. The reason that I've marked these muscles off as kind of important to note that they exist is because he's got really long arms. And his long arms, you can see it in this pose as well actually, notice how his shoulders are also quite low. Like he's not up and square across the shoulders. It's quite triangular here. And that's because his arms are long, and that means they're heavy. Yeah, so he kind of drags them. They're these sort of slightly flappy appendages because they're quite large in comparison to the rest of his body, especially in comparison to the length of his legs. Yeah, he's got quite short legs, quite long arms. So those muscles, they become quite important. Okay, and that's kind of it actually. He doesn't have much else in terms of muscle definition. He's going to have some in the legs, so he's definitely going to have the quadricep muscles. Really hard to draw with such a wily pen, actually. So he's going to have yeah, those muscles in his quadriceps definitely, because yeah, he's quite springy, and as we know if you've seen the film, his character's quite springy. Yeah, so he'll definitely have those ones to an extent. So they're quite important. But actually, the rest of him, genuinely, if you in terms of rigging, like if you're gonna use this as a 3D character, all of this stuff is just kind of unnecessary. Like it's not that important. I mean, he has got, he's got ever so slight kind of, he's got shoulder muscles. He has absolutely no bicep or tricep. These are really, really thin structures, almost non-existent, in fact. Yeah. And the same for his pectoral muscles. So his pectoral muscles he's got one that's dominant here. The other one kind of sits there, but it's small, it's almost non-existent. And then yeah, he'll have two kind of really underdeveloped high abdominal muscles just on the tip of his rib cage, which again will be almost made of nothing. Forearm strength, like abs, like he will have some. So on the outside he'll have nothing. There'll be almost no muscle there, but he will have. Just looking at the size of his hands, he will have his forearm muscles. The way to think about muscles is if you want to know how big or small the muscle should be, think about the next thing in the chain. So I'm hoping you all know what I mean by IK and FK. Yeah? When we think about an inverse kinematic movement and a forward kinematic. You will get into this. This is like a thing. But I don't want to step over and start talking about something else. But with a forward kinematic, it's always about the next step in the chain. So you have the base level of the chain, which would be like the shoulder, and then the next step is the elbow, the next step is the wrist. But when we think about muscles, if you want to know how big should your forearm muscles be, think about how much movement needs to happen in your hands. If the hands are doing nothing in the character, so the character doesn't have useful hands, then the forearm muscles will be relatively slender. Okay? If they're not intending to use their arms a lot, so their arms are quite weak, then their shoulder muscle here, this muscle will be quite underdeveloped. If they're going to use their arms a lot, they're going to be really overdeveloped. If you go and look at the sketches of Tarzan, you can see shoulder muscles are enormously, and his pectoral muscles, really overdeveloped. So think about the next thing in the chain. All right, the wrist defines the forearm. The movement from the elbow down the forearm defines the size of the bicep and tricep. The size of the shoulder defines how much is going to be lifted or pulled using the rest of the arm. So think about that kind of thing. So his muscles are super underdeveloped to the point where they're almost non-existent. He will have forearm muscles, and they will kind of have definition because he's got quite large hands, quite squared hands. And they'll weigh something. He's got to have something there. So in terms of the silhouette of his hand, like his arm, his silhouette, I'm just guessing here, would be something. Like this. So you'd have a really kind of blocky. Yeah, but it'd be really thin, but you'd have that curve. You'd have that definition on the inside, but you'd keep it really straight on the outside. Okay, so just, a little bit of definition, but not too much. You wouldn't have the big kind of muscles or anything like that on him. You just wouldn't do it. Okay, it just would look silly. All right, so that's definitely a big no-no. Quite slender. Right, can we go to the one that actually matters here, which is Yama, because Yama's the one that's so different to normal anatomy. So his muscle groups, completely different. Really, really different. So first off, shoulder muscles. We need to have a conversation about shoulder muscles. This muscle here, huge and enormously overdeveloped. What I find quite interesting about this, actually, is that it's so overdeveloped that it kind of overshadows the bicep. So the bicep, you would expect his biceps to be really large, and they probably are comparatively quite large. but his shoulder muscles are so overdeveloped they effectively overshadow them. And then the tricep muscle, which is around the back, is almost non-existent. Forearm muscles are absolutely enormous. Again, so they're taking up large. That muscle actually extends over and underlaps against that one. So those muscles really sizable. But he's complex actually because his muscle groups are he's not a muscular character. He's a very large character, but he hasn't got a lot of muscle. So he hasn't got his muscle is almost comparable to his body fat. So that's got to be considered as well. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. So yeah, this is all kind of clearly dense muscle. That's muscle. I'll sketch in with a lower value as well to mark these out. So I can see they're overlapping and it's getting a bit confusing. So I will go back and clean this up in a second. So you've got these kind of really big muscle groups. In fact, let's just do it now. So you've got so you've got these kind of large muscle groups. But then when we go to his other areas, so across his chest, like his chest is this full width, side, like we can't see his armpit, we can't see between his body and his arm. That implies that you would make you assume that means that's all kind of muscle. Yeah, he's a big guy, he's big and strong, and actually it's not true. His pectoral muscles, try and keep them relatively close, are here and here, roughly. Just quickly kind of colour those in. As I said, I'll do clean up on them so you can see them in a little bit more definition. Now this is where it starts to look strange because now we're actually slipping, you're actively slipping away from the silhouette of the character. Yeah, we are very clearly slipping away from the silhouette of the character, but we'll come to that again in a second. So that one's there and there. These are so that shoulder muscle. Remember I said about size of Fred's, like Fred's got long arms. Well, Yama's got giant arms, which means again he's going to have extremely overdeveloped muscles just here. Bring that up a little bit. So I'll just do a quick clean up on these so you can kind of see where they end. Yeah. And then the next thing to think about was, okay, if that's his upper body, what's his lower body look like? Where is this, how is this muscle actually working? And this is where Yama gets really complex because he's got some really sort of odd proportions to his body. So yeah, he clearly does have abdominal muscle. He would have to just to hold his own body weight up. So he's going to have these abdominal muscles. They're slightly twisted as well, so we have to sort of bring that line this way. One there. One there as well. You can see I'm slowly, notice I'm not doing this on the straight, it is on the curve because of the angle of his body. So even though I'm thinking about his muscles, I'm trying to think about his pose as well. What is the impact on that? And then he's going to have, from here, so those back muscles are going to be really, really under strain. I feel sorry for him, actually. Completely overlaps that way. Might give myself a little reminder in a second. So he's going to have, his muscles aren't actually going to extend again to his silhouette. They're going to be around there. You can see as well, you notice how I've left quite significant gaps between the muscles. Look at how dense, so up here on his arms, you see how the muscles are really tight and close together? And down here, they're spreading out and there's these bigger gaps starting to form. That is because I can see in Yama that his muscle mass is not built, he is muscular. He does have clearly defined muscles here in his torso, but actually those muscles are not toned. Okay, they are not toned muscle at all because he clearly eats a lot of food. Yeah, there's no, there's no question about that. Yeah, he's not toned. Like muscle and the relationship between muscle and fat. I know we're kind of almost drifting away from animation here, but the relationship between muscle and fat is really complex in that if muscle isn't toned, it actually separates. So fat can move into like muscle fibers, can move between muscle fibers and expand the space that a singular muscle occupies, but it also moves into the space and latches on into the space between muscle groups. So what will happen is muscles actually pull apart from one another. They create distance. When we work out, and when we build muscle, as well as building the size of the muscle fibers, the muscles pull together, they contract, and they lock into a tighter space. They physically get closer together. So we've got to remember that he has got this absence of muscle density towards his midriff that we need to think about. So if we look at, can we see the difference actually between, like, look how much space his body occupies there compared to how much it occupies there. Yeah, we know that the pelvis, everyone's pelvis, is quite near, like especially the tip of your pelvis. You can feel that. You can feel your hip bone. Yeah, even regardless of how big or small you are, most people can feel that. So it means that the muscle is going to gather at that point. Yeah, it's going to gather here. Sorry, I'll put this in white so you can see what I'm talking about. The muscles are going to gather here and they're going to gather here. Okay, same for up here as well. The muscles will gather here and they'll gather here at the apex of the shoulder, just right up in the tip of the shoulder is where the pectoral muscle gathers. So we know that's going to happen. But everything else in between is now starting to have sort of fat stores moving into it. So you can see, yellow's such a creepy colour to use, but you kind of got here, this area here. Okay. Side on, that's just stores of body fat, and that body fat's here as well. And it is moving over the top, but not as dense over the top. So those are the areas that are kind of made up of body fat. Now, when we think about that, we can start to get confused and make some assumptions about what happens in the lower body. If the upper body looks like this, I feel really bad drawing this in yellow. I feel like it was just the wrong colour to use. It should have used like a sky blue or something. It's just, yeah, so I'm just going to kind of colour it in. So you can say, look, these are the areas that just this minimal muscle density. This muscle here, incidentally, this one, yeah, when developed properly, there's one here as well. When developed properly, that should extend almost all the way down to your groin, like all the way down. And when it's underdeveloped, it just shrinks kind of upwards and just floats and does nothing. So that should be naturally on Fred, that muscle is there, like that. Okay, it's next to the last two abdominal muscles. It's just sort of folded behind them ever so slightly, actually. But yeah, so Yama probably won't have those at the same level, I would guess, anyway. The next thing we do is the legs. And the legs are really interesting because they work completely differently. So we can see the bone. We've got the bone of his leg there. And if I'll zoom in a bit so we can get a bit clearer on this. So there's his leg. And you could make an assumption that he's, it's the same principle that like he's got like this much muscle and then all this is just fat, and it's absolutely not true. So this will be, let's step backwards to get the right lines on this. Uh, that is pure muscle. Okay. The only areas where you would see areas of soft tissue, and I will explain why we're even talking about that and what does this mean for animators, is possibly on the inside there. Okay, if he didn't have strong, powerful quadriceps and a strong, powerful hamstring, his body would not be able to get up. He wouldn't be able to stand. You know, he needs that power to think of how much muscle is up here on the top of his body, especially shoulders, arms, the T section. He would need developed muscles to lift that off the ground. Okay, same here as well. We'll do it over this side actually because his legs in a better position to see it clearly. But here we've got. I need to get my red. That muscle. You can even see the bulge of it actually. I know it's a bit of a characterization because obviously it's animated, you know, it's not photoreal or anything. But that muscle would be incredibly dense. Okay, so yeah, just really, really, really dense muscle. And that's really, really important to remember. That you know, yes, characters might be large, they might kind of be heavy, but they still have to move, and weight moves weight. Yeah, you need strength to move body weight. So you've got now when you think about these kind of anatomies, you can start to think, oh, you know, what's actually fat, what's actually muscle, what's the difference between the two? So, you know, there's some areas like his head. I find this quite interesting that obviously he'll have those kind of nicely dense muscles up here. He'll have those two that kind of sit just there. You've got the two that overlap just there. And then you've got the muscles that kind of run downwards that allow us to do that. So we've got these kind of side muscles, which are quite nice. But actually, the majority of his neck, I think especially up here, like this is just cakes. Like this is, you know, the muscle's quite narrow. And you can see that in the size of his head. He's not going to have particularly dense muscle up there. So why do we even care? What is the point in knowing this and being able to look at a drawn character and go, okay, how are you actually made? Like, how are you designed? Well, all of this defines how he moves. Do you remember I said I think he could pick Fred up? He can pick Fred up not just because he's bigger, but because look at the quantity of muscle that exists. Fred probably weighs Yama's arm. Because that's not just size. This is the other thing about when we think about characters, right? Size and mass are not a perfect. There's not a perfect ratio, size to mass. Okay, the weight of an object and its mass and its physical space that it occupies are not the same. Because if they were, you know, a 10-foot wide ball of foam would weigh the same as a 10-foot wide ball of concrete. It doesn't work like that. Objects have different densities, and muscle is the same. Muscle has different densities. Yama, in particular, is a character who is very big, but has incredible density of muscle as well. He's clearly got some athleticism to him. So it's particularly in this area, yeah, across his arms and across his shoulder and his thigh. He has got muscle to him. That's why he's scary and not funny. Like when you watch that scene, he's intimidating because he looks like he could do you. Like he could beat you in a fight. He looks physically violent as a character, and he has the muscles to kind of back that up. And that's where, you know, that's not accidental. But it also means there's limitations on what he can do. This is heavy. It will take time to move, which means he'll be naturally quite a slow character. Okay? The same character, the same size character in terms of space, like how much space a character occupies, who has less muscle mass, will be less strong, but move faster, because they have less weight to move, potentially. So these are all things to consider how I animate this character. How does he walk? How does he lift an object? How does he bend over? You know, can he run? And if he can, how? One of the best examples of running in animation, in terms of consideration for body mechanics and anatomy, one of the smartest things I've ever seen and will ever see is the work. I think it was, I want to say it was Ward Kimball and Milt Kahl, but I might be wrong. But it's the title sequence for Disney's Robin Hood. And all they do in that sequence is have all these animal characters running up and down. That's it. The whole title sequence is just like a chicken running and a dog running and a tortoise running, side on. But the level of thought that's gone into that movement and the understanding of anatomy is really clever. Really, really clever. Because they've understood that obviously they have to move like humans because it's Disney and it's fun and anthropomorphic and very fluffy. But every animal has its own anatomy, and that anatomy impacts the way it can move. So it's very, very intelligently kind of produced work. So with this in mind, we need to move on to our actual task, to the thing that I want you to be able to do. Because I gave you something with this. I gave you that. Yeah, we started with this kind of finished, this finished work. And I asked you to work backwards. Now that's the exact opposite of how you're going to have to work on some of your projects in the next year and a half. You're going to have to work from nothing to something. And it starts with design work like doing thumbnails. And that's where we're going to start with this. Is we're going to start thinking about a series of characters in thumbnail form. So can you just do me a favour? There's a bell here, but yeah, save. Just save this. Save it. Just keep it as this, as a large document format. It's really, really helpful just to do that. It keeps the files smaller. I wonder if I've got that other sequence that you can take a look at in terms of like what mechanics look like when they come to life. Yeah, I've got that one, Miles Yo. That's a good example, actually, of thinking about anatomy with movement. So I said you have to understand how something's made to understand how it moves, just before we get onto the practical task, just to give you a bit of kind of inspiration for this. So this is by Miles Yo. It's very short animations. Has anyone seen this? Because it's done the rounds. It's definitely done the rounds the last couple of months. So it's Leonardo. So the brilliance of this is that his understanding, obviously you've got a character, it's a character and we're trying to act and bring it to life. But the brilliance of it is understanding the limitations of anatomy. There are some things this character can't do. And this is actually closer to the first kind of iteration of these characters of the Ninja Turtles from the 90s than we see now. So the last kind of 10 years of this franchise and these characters, they've become really flexible and kind of, they've got a lot of movement in the middle and they've got lots of straight lines in them, which is very strange. It's kind of the opposite to their traditional muscular anatomy or skeletal-muscular anatomy. This character goes back to how they should have originally been. So you can see that, yeah, that's nicely performed. When the actual mechanics stuff starts, so the jump, there is a part of this body that cannot move. And that's the shell. It is a rigid construct. It's a skull, it's a sternum, it's a ribcage. It cannot flex. It's completely solid. And so what that means is when the character moves, all of the movement, everything, you look, there's no flex on that shell at all. Everything is done through the limbs. So the things that can move, and the things that can't move, they don't. And just to make it, the reason it stands out as good, and you may have spotted this, those of you who've seen this before, is at the start of the shot, it just looks kind of cool. It's just like, yeah, this is interesting. And you don't notice the fact that the camera is locked to the shell. It's only here that you'll see that that's where the camera lock is. It's on the shell. And that means that because we're locked onto what's effectively a sphere, just moving, we get to appreciate the sort of detail and the cleverness of all the limbs. So it locks to it and it rotates around and we can see all that really nice movement in the body here. I like the fact that he's got tension in the heel. I can't do it without it overshadowing, but his heel is up when he lands and that's a really nice little bit of kind of detail. As he comes down there, his heel's up and it kind of lowers. Anyway, so yeah, there's lots of good stuff out there that can kind of inspire you and make you realise how much detail goes into anatomy when how much thought goes into anatomy when we're working. So the task. There it is. Shape, construction, action. I would like you to draw just as silhouettes. So just rough thumbnail silhouettes. 2 silhouettes of 2 different body shapes. And don't think about it in 3 dimensions. Think about it as a silhouette. As a flat space occupying the screen. Yeah, what is the shape of this character? Over the top of that, I then want you to do the same stages we've just done with Yama and with Fred, and if you want to go back and do Edna Mode, you can, which is to then draw in if that's the space my character occupies, what's the skeletal anatomy behind that? Like, what's the length of the spine, how long are the legs, and sort of bring in that information. And then over the top of that, going again and go, okay, well, if that's the skeleton, what's the implications for anatomy? So that's the construction phase. Then what I'd like you to do is on the action phase, is take the same silhouette, but put it in a pose. So I know what we're all going to do. Well, for that construction, you're all going to go face on, arms and legs, yeah, and just think about it as simply as possible to help your understanding. But now I want you to take it to the next level. I want you to think, okay, what does my character look like if they are stepping forwards? Or if they're stepping to the side? Or what do they look like if they are about to jump? Or jumping, or mid-air, or just some kind of movement. So the second phase is to go back, so we do the first 2, then we go back and we draw another silhouette of that action taking place, and we do the skeleton, and we do the muscles. All right? You can if you want to use medical anatomical reference to do that, you're welcome to. So I use, where are we? Which one's my board? None. Oh, here's my board. No, that's Pat's board. We'll come back to Pat. If you don't have a Pinterest account, get one, because it should be the most important thing in the world to you right now. Yeah, I keep a board of just anatomical studies, of just pictures of muscles and like drawings of muscles, just to help me remember kind of roughly where they are and how they're laid out. This isn't helpful. So if you want to do that, yeah, you absolutely can. There's mine, anatomical studies. So yeah, I do keep guides like this of just kind of laying out roughly kind of where muscles are and how they work. So if you want to use anatomical reference, you can to help you, but I don't want you to use it to design with. Yeah, you figure out your shape. So to show you my first shape, let's make that a bit bigger. Lovely. What are you doing? Sorry, my Photoshop's going a little bit strange today. That's all right. There we go. So my shape. There you go. There's my silhouette. That's what I'm going to work with. It's just that. Really squared off. Really exaggerated. So that's the first one I'm going to do. All right? And then from that, I can then go in and go, all right, damn. Like, what's the skeleton? How does the skeleton work for this silhouette? So that's what I want you to do. We've got a fair bit of time. I'm going to be with you until 12 o'clock, but we're going to work through this kind of slowly and methodically. So start with that silhouette and follow the exact same workflow. So I might just clean that head up a bit, just get it a little bit smoother, maybe widen it out ever so slightly. And then I'll go, right, new layer. Take that one down. Up to that near white not perfect white, and start thinking, okay, what is this character actually made of? You know, how wide is this? What's the dimensions here? Shoulders are here. Why is the head so low? That's the other thing. I put my head really low. So what's the implications of that? I tend to do side-ons as well. So for this one, it's like, okay, well, what does that character look like side-on? So go back to this one. Something like this. So you can see I'm just now thinking about, like, yeah, side on, what does that character actually look like? What does that do to their anatomy and their behavior? So I think that's not too bad for side on, actually. I'm only doing side on because I wasn't too sure of what it looked like from the front. If you know what it's going to be, then you don't necessarily need to do a side on. But I find that's quite helpful to just make me think, okay, well, how does this work? I mean, is this character like super muscly, or are they not? You know, have they got really, really low muscle definition? There's some muscles, so just to go up slightly, I know that will be definitive. So, for example, I know for a fact that this muscle here is going to be dense. Because he's just a wide shoulder mass, so he's got to have a very definitive muscle mass on the legs. Absolutely got to have that. Okay, and then I'll start thinking, well, if that's the case, like, what does it mean for the upper body? Like, do I make him completely rounded? If so, then it might be something where he's got a very thin. So if I made his pectoral muscles quite thin like this, and I actually really spread out his abdominal muscles, and really pull them apart. So this is quite rough at the moment, but I'll go in and kind of clean up those two there. So if I make these muscles quite thin, so you can see I've got very underdeveloped pectoral muscles. They're quite narrow considering the size. I've got very widespread abdominal muscles with a clear line down the middle. What that says is that up here, these muscles, so the upper arm muscles, actually have to be quite small. Like he has to have quite underdeveloped upper body muscles because he hasn't got the pectoral muscles to support them. So again, here, it's not going to have much. More to there. So that's going to create pockets here. Like that. Just colouring this really loose. We'll go in and do a clean up in a second. So just marking out like what's his true silhouette. From the side's quite difficult actually because this is basically just going to all be yellow with the exception of just there. Yeah.
When you're working out like the kind of width of the hips and shoulders, would you sort of do that backwards from the thigh bones and things? Because obviously in a real person, like your hip bone is not going to change that dramatically. So how do you kind of know how much to exaggerate that thigh?
So the silhouette's the defining point because we're always working with an animation. You're always going to have those characters that are slightly exaggerated. But it depends where you mean. Do you mean like this waist ratio up here, or do you mean just the width of that hip?
That like massive pelvis bone.
So that is defined by the straight lines here. So because when I did the silhouette, I did straight lines. That implies straight away that there has to be a wide pelvis because of that center of gravity, that gimbal curve. Like when you're animating it, everything's got to balance nicely. If you did a silhouette that was desaturate, if I did a silhouette that was even just slightly thinner. So even if it had kind of like it was quite wide at the top. So say it was really wide at the top like this, and wide at the bottom, but tapered. If there was any indication of a taper like that, even on a wide character, then you could say, oh, actually, that means that the hip bone is actually narrower. Yeah, and it's just lots of body fat. Because that taper implies that there's a level of kind of closer definition going on. So for this character, yeah, he could be just kind of like an anatomically regular character that's just really muscly. Yeah, so in which case, yeah, the actual bone structure works. And that's where you end up getting characters. The only one that springs to mind is such a bad example, but Johnny Bravo, the Cartoon Network character, is an example of that, where actually his skeletal anatomy is a regular human, but the idea is that he spends all his time at the gym working out, and that's why he's kind of a normal skeleton with an amplified muscle mass. So he's got the narrow hips, but kind of really wide on the shoulders. But it's that tapered shape. If it tapers this way, it implies there's a level of normality. If it tapers straight or tapers out, then you need to kind of have a character that just moves on a wider center of gravity. And it also affects that animation as well. So this character, so Yama, and a wide hip bone, way more stable. They should be animated as a more stable, physically stable character than Johnny Bravo, who's narrow at the hips. Because you think it's almost like a upside down pyramid in that the pressure at the bottom is really high, so it'd be really easy to tip it and kind of move it over. But it varies, and actually a lot of the time we'll never work at these extremes, would you? You'd work at something far less. You could do a character that's just, like say for example, you did a character that was just really kind of boxy. Yeah, just a really square character like that. You would just have a normal anatomy underneath. Yeah, with just body fat to kind of pad it out. So if I said this is my character, I've gone beyond the thing here, down here somewhere. But yeah, that character would have just, the skeleton would just be completely regular inside. Yeah, and it's just, then we just think, well, there's minimal muscle mass. And it's really just fat. Yeah, it's just flesh that kind of pads them out.
We were speaking last week a little bit about kind of breaking the natural movement of limbs, so maybe overbending an arm or something. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's completely fine. I think there's absolutely no reason why, especially with 3D animation, you should break the rigs to get the right shapes. But that actually comes down to a different principle, which is the I don't want to distract you all, but there's the principles of simple and complex in character posing. So, in fact, I was going to show you some artist work anyway, and Jin Kim was the artist one of the ones I was going to show you. But in character posing, to make characters look good when you're animating them, they should always have their keyframes should always have like a simple line and a complex line. So I just go for these humanoid characters that he designed. Like this one. You see this, pause for a second, this punch, this design. The simple line is this line around the outside edge, and the complex line is the line through the middle. You think about it as a silhouette. So we always try and aim for those because they're interesting. Asymmetry is beautiful. Symmetry is weird. That symmetrical shapes just aren't natural. They don't really occur in nature. So even something as simple as like a wave, that pose works because it's got a simple line down one side and a complex line down the other. To go back to what you were saying, the reason that we would break rigs is to get those. So if we want to make sure that we've always got simplicity and complexity in there somehow, you might need to stretch the rigs. So all the I think all the best made rigs have a natural stretch to them anyway, where they'll overextend without breaking and without kind of going strange, or without, sometimes cheaper rigs, like the elbows pop, like if you extend the arms too far or overextend them, they sort of like pop out of place, and then you have to reattach it all, and it's a complete pain in the backside. But yeah, that's the general rule. I think you can break them. The other thing you can do is stuff what I've done, kind of what I did here, where like heads, you've got a lot of movement in your neck, but sometimes you want to kind of bring the shoulders right up, so you'd break the neck and like move the head down further than is naturally possible, just to get a level shape, so you get like shoulder, head, shoulder, all in a perfect line, which is quite a Looney Tunes kind of thing to do. You sort of line them all up that way. It's perfectly fine to do because everything's moving. I think the worst thing you can do as a 3D animator is like pause 3D movies and go through them frame by frame, because you'll just see so many broken rigs where they manipulate them and move them. Tangled's a good example, actually, of a movie that they broke their rigs constantly all the way through. So just some more examples, of like complex and simple. That's a great one. So the simple line is this shape around the edge here. See how it all kind of lines up nicely, and the complex is the shape here. Now to do that, to get that smooth line, you might have to, on an x-axis, shunt the neck over to one side, so that when you put the camera in position, you get the smoothness. But you could totally do it. It's completely possible. I'm sure, I'm just going to search him. I'm sure it was Tony Fusilli who did some of the designs we looked at today. Yeah. So yeah, Tony Fusilli is like, he's done lots of children's books and stuff, but he was one of the primary designers on Incredibles. But a lot of his stuff kind of has those same principles applied of like simple and complex and overextended shapes. And the thing with anatomy though, while you're learning it, just to go back, look at the muscular design here and these poses for whatever his name was from Brave. Yeah, it's really thinking about anatomy and like how do those muscles sit as part of the shape? How do they help to create the smooth and complex lines? When you're learning and when you're figuring it out, you kind of have to start thinking about it in a really linear fashion like this, where we really do break it down to those super, super simple, obvious things. When you're confident in your characters, you don't have to do that. You can design it and just think it. You can kind of keep it in your head a little bit. But it's a good habit to get into, just always thinking about like, what's the implications of my design on the way my character moves. So I thought I'd show you, because we've only got like 5 minutes left or so. I want to just show you some examples of different artists that do this very well. So yeah, the first artist I had here was Jin Kim. So it's well worth checking out his work. Just because he doesn't draw anatomically, so he doesn't draw skeletons and muscles, but you can see the thought is there in the designs. So he's always thinking about, he doesn't just draw characters like static. They don't just exist. He's always designing them in a way that they are alive. He's thinking about how they move and how they behave. There's another example. So simple and complex. This is quite early art, and obviously that didn't happen in the end. That design's way off from the final. But in these two characters, see that simple line there down the right-hand side? More complex, where his hand's sticking out. And then on Rapunzel, it's the opposite way around. Her simple line is there. It's like a near vertical line straight down the dress. There's the simple line. So to get that, there might be all sorts of strange stuff happening. Like to get her leg, like once you pose this, to get her leg in position, you might actually have to rotate the hip right down in an unnatural way just to get her leg out that far, potentially. So yeah, he's a really good one to check out just to see anatomy in action and always kind of those thoughts about what a body can actually do. Which is really nice because a lot of artists do this stuff where they think, I know this is one of his, I know I've just praised him and now I'm going to diss him, but sometimes when you design characters, you think so much about how they look and the costuming and the colour and they're not really useful. You can't use that. You can't bring that into the workspace in Maya and use it as reference whilst you're animating because it's not that useful. Whereas something that's more kind of performative, so this is a good example actually. The performative work has got consideration for muscle. So he's thinking like, how does he lift his arms? How does he move and manipulate? What happens when he turns his body? You know, all these things. He's thinking about the muscles. That's really helpful to a designer. These ones as well. They're really helpful, really, really helpful to a modeler and to an animator to understand, oh, I can see that he has got a lot of upper body strength, but I can see that also this character is very performative with his hands because he's got large forearms. So it's implying that there's a lot he's going to do lots of stuff kind of with his hands. And that he has got muscular definition. Isn't he a farmer or something? I haven't seen the Emperor's New Groove in donkey's years, but yeah, I think this character's like a farmer, so he's got a bit of muscle, like upper body strength and stuff. Really big thighs as well. So yeah, Jin Kim's really worth checking out. The other ones I brought up in terms of structure, like instruction and learning how to design with more confidence, because there are a lot of muscles and they are very confusing. And sometimes when you draw them wrong, it all throws it out of whack. There's an artist called Normand LeMay, between him and his wife, they have produced 2 books now, specifically on helping animators understand how to design for animation. The books are called 100 Tuesday Tips, Part 1 and Part 2. If you can get a copy of those books, just buy them. Okay. When the first book, when it came out, was really hard to get, to the point where it wasn't the only reason I went all the way to California, but it was one of the reasons, was to go to a bookstore that had copies that wouldn't ship it internationally, to pick up a copy. Now I think it's all over. It's called 100 Tuesday Tips. I'll show you. He probably just sells it in his own store now. Currently unavailable. Yeah, there they are. Part 1 and Part 2, both currently unavailable. But yeah, they're really good. They're really, really helpful books because they go into lots of other stuff as well. But just to show you, these are actually pages from it. Some of these are pages from it. But yeah, Norman LeMay goes into a lot of detail to explaining like muscular definition and how legs move. So it's not just how to draw a leg, but things like even the simple complex lines and stuff that exist within basic muscle groups and things like that are really helpful. Also on implications of muscle on posing and like the rotations of the body. So when we drew Yama, I said like he's rotated slightly, so the muscles had to follow that. Stuff on there as well. He used to, like Norman LeMay in particular, used to provide lots of content, like really, really heavy amounts of content for people to help them. And he's sort of slowed down recently, understandably. But yeah, so he's well worth checking out. He's also got another book, which is called Croquis, which is a book of his life drawings. It's just a whole book of every week he does a life drawing class and he just took it a page, and it's just and that's quite useful because then you're not being told how to do something. You can just unpick it yourself. You can look at the way he designs and kind of make sense of it. Yeah, so some of these would be in that book actually. Yeah, some of them definitely are. But yeah, these are all his kind of life drawings. But everything's movement based. It's all around muscles and how characters move and manipulate and pose. And they're away from that kind of rigid, these are the muscle groups, these are the bones. You don't need that. You need this stuff that's more movement orientated. And then the last thing I was going to show you was actually the page that I moved away from. In terms of just resources and understand, because you don't need to just understand how to do something. You need to know how others have done it and how others have approached things like anatomy, body mechanics, movement, performance. A really helpful person to follow on Pinterest is a guy called Pat Comper, who's got one of the most comprehensive collections of not just principles, like he's got things on balance and things on skeletal anatomy and things like that, but he's also got a really comprehensive list of artists who work in animation, either as modelers or as animation designers or as animators, who have and he's just got big collections of their work. So you can start to really and by film, he works by film as well for some of his boards. So you can kind of go in and look at, for that film, I'm inspired by this film or this director. How did they do it? How did they work out their anatomy and their mechanics and stuff? So he's a really good one to look at. There's some Bill Schwab stuff, who again, was really, really good at kind of, just working on not just the designs, but the performance. How does something actually kind of come to life? How does it behave and manipulate? A little bit more simplistic, possibly, but there's still here the troll mechanics. Yeah, thinking about what's a pose, you know, what are their proportions. I love the idea that trolls effectively don't have knees because they're so small. It's just like, yeah, forget the knees, just FK from the hip, like, and that's all we need for that kind of movement. But he's thinking about that in the design stage, so the animators, the riggers, and all of that team can look at it and go, okay, I know how this is supposed to move. I know how this is supposed to kind of come to life. But yeah, well worth checking out. So that task, have a go at this. Go back to, stay in Photoshop and don't do I worked really fast on the other one, just went, just throw loads of stuff in. But go into this and start making decisions about the designs. So try and do 2 separate runs. So one set that's a character, just the posed process from a silhouette to skeleton to muscle and fat, and then another one that is in action. So do your character doing a jump or a flip or even just carrying something. That I've tried that a few times actually, where just give them a bowling ball. Now, how would your character hold this bowling ball? Would they have to hold it with 2 hands? Would they be able to hold it upright? If they were holding it with 2 hands, are they weighed down by it and dragged forward, and does that contract all their chest muscles? Or are they able to just hold it upright like that? And if so, what happens in that twist? What happens to their muscles and what's kind of exposed? How does their silhouette change? So all these questions, start thinking about doing. There's other things you can do. One other little tip, once you're confident with this and picking a pose, picking a silhouette and turning it into a more detailed drawing, is do the same but with actual pieces of narrative. So go and grab a live action film in particular. Don't use an animated script. Go and grab a script from a live action film. Just pick a sentence from the script that describes a character's movement, and then go, okay, I'll use that, because that's how most animation gets produced. It starts from words. So you do it. Start from the same process of like visualizing not so much the shot, but the performance. They describe this character as this type of person. How does that type of person look and therefore move and behave and perform? So yeah, what I will do though, same as I'm trying to do with all the other kind of design classes, I will add on Moodle, I don't know how you'll do it on the animation arts pathway, we've got to deal with that, we've got to get that sorted.
I'm working with Susan.
Okay, we'll chase up the registry team to get that changed. But what I'll probably do as well, just so you can see how everyone else has tackled it, on 3D computer animation, I'll put all this in a folder so it's sort of nice and neat. But I'll also put in a forum space where you can just upload your JPEGs out of Photoshop. So you can see, I think it's really good for you to see how all of you have tackled this challenge of like interpreting anatomy from a silhouette. All right, and then comment on each other's stuff, and it's just
We're
nice.
using Discord a lot, so
If you want to do it on there, just upload it to there, and I think you learn a lot from looking at other people. Like we don't have all the knowledge in our heads. You've got to look at how other people have done stuff and then use that to inform what you're doing. Right, that is it. I'm afraid I'm out of time and I need to go to the Ministry of Sound workspace, not the club. I'm not going to the club. Any questions, obviously you can ping me an email. But yeah, just have a go at it and see how you kind of get on. Okay? Yeah, cool. That's